Hi everyone, despite having gone to the Swiss Alps and Gen Con via Florida in 2019, I found myself really wanting to travel again in the autumn. I just needed to get away. I wanted some time in the sun, a break from the impending months of darkness and just the general mundanity of life. What I wasn't expecting is how it would change my life for 2020. I searched every corner of the internet for what I wanted to do in autumn. I didn't want to spend an astronomical amount of money as the travel fund had taken quite a hit already over the year. I thought of jotting round a few European cities, and I seriously thought of an Italian itinerary by train. But it didn't really pan out, and I wasn't sure I was looking for something that adventurous. Plus city breaks and me don't really mix. Then I saw a 7-night cruise deal from Los Angeles to the Mexico Riviera. It was on a ship I'd become madly obsessed with, the Norwegian Bliss. And it was really a killer deal, especially when you consider there was no food or drink costs to be added to it. The details of the cruise are for another video series in the new year, but it suffices to say I wasn't expecting to get much from it. I mean, I was expecting to enjoy it, but not for it to be life-changing. You know, some time in the sun, some food in interesting restaurants, see the odd show, have a go on the go-karts, experiment with the odd cocktail. You know, I don't drink, but when it's essentially sort of free, I thought I'd give it a go. Read the odd book. You know, the typical all-inclusive hotel sort of holiday. It just happened to be moving across the ocean. If you'd asked me before I went if the cruise would feature as one of the episodes in this so-called decade, a narrative worth retelling to you, I'd have been wrong and I'd have been doubtful. But the experience was like nothing I'd experienced before. I'd not fully comprehended two things. What having 4 days at sea, 3 of them in a row, actually meant, combined with not being able to connect to the internet. Total disconnection. The result was one of the most mindful and present experiences I've ever had. I literally can't recall literally nothing like it in my life. I wasn't expecting it because I live alone, right? So if I talk to anyone during the evening, it's a group-like conversation with Daisy Dog where I try to interpret a multitude of meanings to her one sound that she makes when she isn't barking. I get in from work and my life is hardly a whirlwind of activity. A lack of activity though is not the same as a lack of distraction. Quite obviously. I'm distracted by the TV, I'm distracted by YouTube, I'm distracted by, let's face it, Twitter. I've possibly not left all of work at work. Being at home alone, as I've learnt recently, is not the same as not being distracted. Contrast that with the cruise. You find yourself up before dawn, walking around the jogging track on the deck, waiting for the sun to come up. Then you watch the sunrise over the distant horizon with nothing to see but the ocean in every direction. During the day, you're back on the deck looking out over the sea or lounging around on the waterfront sofas. No distractions, either incoming or outgoing. Your brain, completely emptied of minutiae and clutter, finds itself abhorring a vacuum, and it fills itself with thoughts and processes that it normally doesn't find space for. All the things that it can't find time for during the distractions in normal life. It's a bit like when you go for a walk or have a long hot shower. Your brain solves problems and ideas come into focus that were once elusive. But now imagine that state of being for almost 72 hours straight. In the first instance, I filled the vacuum by reading books. I read 5 books in 7 days on that cruise, which was absolutely glorious. And that's the dichotomy I have with reading. I love it when I do it, but my brain obviously exists in too much of a distracted state to really enjoy it. I just never seem to get around to doing it at home, unless I really dedicate myself to it, like that year when I had a goal to read so many books in a year. 5 books in 7 days is some crazy return to my younger self when I used to tear through books at an amazing rate. It just shows I've not lost interest in reading. It's just life has changed around it. In the space between books, I found myself questioning my life. Some of these questions are constant, and regular watchers of this channel are quite familiar with them, such as the goal to live a more intentional, for actual outcomes life. I think I'm getting better at that. The fact I'm running a tabletop role-playing game is one of the signs of that, right? I've been wanting to do that for a while, I focused on it, and now I'm doing it. But there are still elements of my life where I choose the path of least resistance. Instead of doing something creative, I'll do something passive. Then I'll pick the most passive option, right? So instead of doing something that's consumption based, like playing my backlog of video games, I'll watch something on Netflix instead. I can sometimes be at risk of doubling down on the most passive option. But the main thing is, I always think I should be thinking bigger. And that brought me back to my realization in the few months after my wife abruptly left, in that we could have thought bigger. I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't believe that's what she took away from it. It's primarily what I took away from it, in the sense that we'd reached a point financially and in terms of security in our life, where instead of just coasting, we should have thought bigger. What I wanted was to be as mindful and present as I was on that cruise, more often. I didn't want it to be some isolated thing I experienced only when sailing down the western coast of a different continent. So the question is, how could I achieve that? I came to the conclusion I couldn't achieve it by continuing as I was, in the patterns I'd established in the last 3 years. I could pretend I could, but I'd be lying to myself. I'm not sure I came to any conclusions on the cruise as to how I was going to achieve it, but I did realise what I wanted. I wanted to find a way of experiencing the feeling of adventure, discovery and mindfulness associated with travel more regularly than twice for 10 days or so a year. The thought would stay with me throughout the last months of the decade. And I guess the question at that point was, where will it ultimately lead? But the seeds of another small great change seem to have been set. Until the next chapter, you can support me by doing a few simple things. Like the video, subscribe and hit the bell icon, certainly post a comment, and let's continue to make small great changes to make life a story worth telling.